Chris Corrigan. I'm a facilitator. I live on Bowen Island, Nuclealachum, in the Squamish language, and I'll be hosting this gathering here tonight, this open house on Cooper's Green. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories in which we're working, of course, in the Sunshine Coast, that's Shishtal territory, as well as the Squamish Nation. And here on Bowen Island, where I live, Nuclealachum is within Squamish, Tameoch, Squamish territory as well. And as a gesture, beyond simply a land acknowledgement, a portion of my own fee for tonight will be donated to Kwiat Stalmach, which is a Squamish language organization that's developing the fluency in Squamish language speakers across the territory, and also working with Squamish language fluency teachers at Simon Fraser University. So they'll be in receipt of some of that tonight. You're very welcome, and good to have you with us here, both on the Zoom webinar, as well as joining us live if you're watching on the SCRD website. We have an hour and a half this evening, and we'll be doing presentations on the current status of this building and where the project is. We'll be having a question and answer period a little bit later, and I'll give you some instructions about how to get your questions asked and answered. You can ask questions at any time during the presentation by hitting that question and answer button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can post a question in there. We can see those questions, the participants won't be able to. Some of those questions we'll be able to answer in text, and some of them the panelists will answer as we go. At the end of the presentation period, there'll also be an opportunity for folks to raise their hands and get put into a queue, and at that time, you'll be able to, I'll unmute your mic and you can ask a question live to one of the panelists. So we're all set to go, and with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ian Hall from the Sunshine Coast Regional District to welcome you to tonight's proceedings.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's community engagement session. Whether you've been following this project for some time or this is your first introduction to it, your participation tonight is genuinely appreciated. And we're gathered tonight to review the Cooper's Green Hall replacement project, several key areas of community interest about the project, including the project's site and budget, and after we share some information, to invite your questions and input. And your questions and comments will serve to test the project proposal as it stands now, and could show us where there are opportunities or imperatives to change it or improve it. And SCRD and our design team, and we have Craig Burns and Emily Sider here from Principal Architecture with us tonight, will be actively listening, and there'll be a short questionnaire available following the session. And I would also like to acknowledge that we have attending tonight elected members of the SCRD board. And thank you, directors, for being here. And we know that not everyone was available tonight, so this session will be recorded and posted on the SCRD Cooper's Green page in the next couple of business days, along with a link to the questionnaire, which will be open until the end of the day on February 4th. And so then what happens after that? Well, the results will be reported to an SCRD committee in February through a staff report that will be published on a public agenda. And then in March, an SCRD committee will consider the Cooper's Green Hall replacement project, along with such additional recommendations that might emerge from our process beginning tonight as part of the SCRD's 2021 annual budget. And I'll now turn it over to Mr. Craig Burns from Principal Architecture, who will lead us through the first part of the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ian. And thank you, everyone, actually, for attending. And I'm just going to share my screen. Let's try that again. So we have prepared a presentation that will hopefully walk you through kind of the life of the project. What we've done is we have organized the presentation in a bit of a timeline to just make it easy to follow kind of where this project started as its origin, and the work and process that we did along the way, how the decisions were made, and walk you through some of the current design, so you understand what the building is like and how it might be used. And as Ian mentioned, we'll talk about the funding for the project. There's some good news to report there, and talk about the next steps, sort of where this project goes from here out. So without further ado, this project actually kind of predated our involvement. It started with the park management plan for Cooper's Green. And I know that we're very familiar with the management plan. I know that there was a lot of work done. This exercise was led by the SCRD and involved quite a bit of public engagement, questionnaires, stakeholder meetings, open houses, outreach, a lot of discussion about what the future of the park should include. And so that was sort of a broad management plan. Part of that plan was the replacement of Cooper's Green Hall, and we inherited that plan as part of our request for proposals to get involved. There was quite a bit of work done around the hall and what it might include, including some study of where it might be relocated on the site if it were to be relocated. And there was some site analysis done as part of that management plan, and this is an excerpt from the report, and it was pretty clear to us at the beginning of the project that replacing the existing hall on this existing site was definitely the preference. So we started our schematic design process. We have a team of structural, mechanical, electrical, and geotech consultants on the team. And we started with a schematic design process. And the first thing we did was really just understand what the program of the building was, size and scale, what the priorities were for the community. We had a task force who consisted of representatives from the SCRD and from Halfmoon Bay Community Association and from Seashell First Nation and other members of the community. And so that task force, we worked with iteratively to kind of work through design questions. So the first part of that was a lot of validation of the program. It also included a validation of the site location in Cooper's Green Park. So we looked at a few other locations in the park that might be better suited to the hall. And we also included the idea of renovating the existing building in place or relocating the hall entirely. And so that exercise was part of our schematic design process. And so with the task force, I know you're not going to be able to read this. This is more of a placeholder, but there was some analysis, evaluation of sort of cost and opportunities, constraints for those separate site locations. And again, the task force gravitated towards replacing the building on the existing site. So schematic design continued, and we did quite a bit of work with the consultants, getting structural, mechanical, electrical, geotech on board. We had a geotech consultant engaged to help us identify what the flood construction level for this building is. And the design was adapted to that flood construction level. And the design team prepared boards and model and a number of materials for an open house that we held in March of 2018. Seems like a long time ago now. So that open house was an invitation. It was held at Cooper's Green Hall, and it was an invitation for people to come and see the plans, give us some feedback, talk about the project. We gave a bit of a presentation. People were able to get used to the idea of the design and just have some conversation about feedback and suggestions. We actually took a number of those comments back to the task force and suggested a number of design changes. So there's a second public open house in June of the same year, and the design changed quite considerably in order to respond to a number of those questions. And those centered around accessibility and connection to the ocean, and resulted in what we think is a much better building, a much tighter, simpler arrangement. So that was presented in June at an open house. And I'm just checking to make sure that I'm covering everything off. Oh, the schematic design, it also included a costing component to it. So at the schematic design level, that is a Class C cost estimate, plus or minus 20%. And so that was part of our process at that point as well. And this may not be big on your screen, but I thought it would be helpful just to walk everybody through what the current design is so that you understand the components of the project are. It's a simple project, but just understanding the logic behind it might be helpful for those who haven't seen it. Just if you're watching my cursor to orient yourself, the ocean is on the left, and the edge of this deck is aligns with the retaining wall from the original. There's a historic building that used that retaining wall. So the entry includes a large covered portion of the deck in order to have a bit of activity at the main entry. The main entry circulation space has some space for coats and mingling. Not a huge space, but this is sort of the main entry right at the core of the building. There's a single large community space, the hall. It's about 1,800 square feet. A pitch roof, open structure, really quite a lovely space with a lot of glazing towards the view out to the ocean. Also some glazing and exiting out towards the park as well. So really a lot more engaged with the park environment. That's the main hall space. It includes some storage for tables and chairs, sort of necessity of having a flexible multi-purpose space. There's a mechanical room, which would obviously contain all the services for the building. A kitchen, which is designed with some commercial equipment and some residential equipment to enable it to support a large meal, but at the same time, it's not producing a lot of meals from scratch. So we had to find a real balance between sort of residential, commercial, and that took up a lot of discussion and consideration. The washroom component of the building satisfy the building code requirements, but it's also it's been designed to have individual toilet stalls to recognize the needs for accessibility and gender neutral washroom facilities in community buildings everywhere you go. And so this arrangement is a very compact version of the individual washrooms. Again, a little bit more additional storage for the building, and then a washroom that could be accessible to the public in the park when the building's not occupied. So when there's not an event on and the building might be locked and secured, there's still a washroom facility available for the public in the park. I'll leave it at that. There's some options that we ran through in terms of what kind of events could be hosted. Again, the hall space is it's a large space. It's got a 20-foot ceiling height in the middle. It's a pitched roof with an open structure, and so it's quite a nice volume in terms of a space. So that design, the schematic design evolved into design development. And so that's when the consultants add a little bit more detail to the project. And by adding that detail, preparing those drawings, we were able to do a more accurate cost estimate. And so that would be a Class B cost estimate, which is a plus or minus 15%. And so right about that time was when we stopped work and started focusing on an application for funding. And so tell you more a little bit about that, I'm going to pass it back to Ian. He's got some comments on
that. Thanks, Craig. So the Sunshine Coast Regional District is always seeking grants to grow and diversify the funding that's available for public services. And in January of 2019, we applied for an Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, or ICIP, grant for this project. And as Craig said, design work stopped at that point while we waited for the grant result. And eventually, after an election and part of a pandemic, the grant results were announced in the middle of 2020. So that was 18 months later, longer than usual for most grant programs. But we were very pleased that SCRD was awarded a significant grant, just a little over $2 million. And that grant is, it's based on a formula. So it's capped at a maximum of $2,013,642 or 73.3% of eligible expenditures up to that maximum. And as part of making the application to the grant, we have to put forward quite a substantial project description. And so the project can evolve and be refined, and the design is not done. So necessarily it must evolve and be refined. But there are constraints on how the funding is used. And so any changes from what was proposed at the time that we applied for the grant need to be approved by the province as the administrator of the grant. And so if you've been following this project, the numbers that are on this slide will look familiar. These are taken from the July 2020 staff report that was on a public agenda at the time that the grant was announced. So as shown in the graphics, based on a total project cost of about $3.1 million, and again, this is as of July last year, the grant was about 65% of that project budget. And a contribution from the Halfmoon Bay Community Association was at that time $222,000. And I want to mention both that figure has changed, and it's now, as of the end of December, just over $344,000. And I also would like to acknowledge both the hard work of the Community Association as a partner to this project and the generosity of the community in raising those funds. Also, part of the project budget are Independent Power Project, or IPP, community amenity contributions. And those total just over $200,000. And so that leaves an unfunded gap of about $651,000, or about 21% of the budget as of last July. And at the time that the grant application went in, the proposed strategy to make up that funding gap was short-term borrowing, so meaning 5 years or less. And so that was included in the funding plan as a way to demonstrate that SCRD could close the funding gap if we were successful in getting the grant. And we've been asked about what the impact on taxes would be if SCRD was to borrow the money. So this slide shows a range of figures. And some context is needed to read these figures. So all rural areas and only rural areas on the Sunshine Coast are participants, or they pay into the Community Parks Service, which is the SCRD service that would deliver this project. And there's many things that affect the tax rate for that service. They would include changes to property assessment, changes between property assessment classes, any new projects that are directed and approved by the SCRD board in a given year, retirement of old debt, just as some examples. But so with that context and those qualifications, looking at this one project in this one SCRD service, if the regional district was to borrow, for example, between $500,000 and $750,000, so that covers the gap that was referenced on the last slide. And if interest rates were what they are now, which is 0.92%, or what they might be if we hypothesize a little bit into the future, of up to 1.25%, that would yield an increase in property taxes for the Park Service of between $1.13 and $2.87 per $100,000 of assessed property value. So that means that if your residential property was assessed at $1 million, for the 5 years of borrowing that would be required for to close that funding gap, your annual property taxes would increase between $11.30 and $28.70. Now, saying that and looking at those numbers from last year, there are a number of other cost considerations for this project. And on the optimistic side, which is what's on the left-hand side of the screen, fundraising is very strong. And as I noted, there's been over $120,000 raised since July 2020 by the Halfmoon Bay Community Association. And again, kudos to the Community Association and to the generous folks on the coast. And as the project has advanced and is, especially as the grants funding was confirmed, offers of in-kind donations have been received. And this has a significant potential to assist with the project, and it's an opportunity for suppliers to have a lasting community impact. And as well, the Halfmoon Bay Community Association has proposed to accept operating responsibility for the hall, which could offset future costs to SCRD taxpayers. And this model is used in other communities with success. And at this time, it is a proposal, and there's no agreement on that. And as well, there were industry standard contingencies included in the cost estimate. On the right-hand side of the screen, the less optimistic or pessimistic side, the cost estimates that we are talking about that yielded the $3.1 million project cost are now over 2 years old. So they did include time escalation, knowing that construction wouldn't occur for a while. And we've had to further estimate escalation, but that may not reflect market conditions in this strong building cycle. And it's also been noted in prior updates on this project that the septic system requires further design to accurately cost estimate. And at this time, an order of magnitude cost is carried in the total project estimate. And I would note as well that we also have a new building code in BC, and BC's energy step code is now required as well. So in summary, there are ways that the funding gap can be reduced from what it currently is estimated at based on those July numbers. But there are also cost risks that need to be monitored and managed. So I'll now turn it back to Craig to talk about next steps. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. So just going back to the timeline, you can now sort of get a picture of how this project has unfolded. We are excited that it's at a point now where it's got some support with tremendous amount of grant funding in order to make it possible. The next steps will maybe just outline following tonight's meeting, and there will be a chance, like was mentioned before, to ask some questions tonight and just have a bit of a discussion about what people are excited about, what they're concerned about with the project, and those comments will be noted. This is being recorded, and so the recording for this event will be available for people who aren't able to make it, and our intent is to have that recording up and live on Monday, the 1st. And there has been a survey prepared online, a simple web-based SurveyMonkey survey. It's one page. And it's really, it would be great if you took the time, the link is on the page there, if you were able to give us a sense of your support for the project. There's a chance for you to offer some comments. And so that survey, we're putting a deadline of the 4th of February in order to gather as much information together in order to inform the staff report. So this page is just describing kind of the immediate next steps, which are gathering the information from tonight and from the survey. Survey is open until the 4th of February. All of this will be summarized in report form and given to the SCRD staff, who will be preparing a report to the board in late February, and ultimately seeking to go to the budget meeting in March. That's sort of the next step to restart the project. If it's successful and it's going ahead, just to give you a sense, there really is more design work to do, more cost estimating to be done. And so that work would be between now and going to tender, which could be as soon as summer this year. And we have the team ready to go to do that. The idea is that this project will be publicly tendered, stipulated sum contract, and provided the tender goes smoothly, there's a award of contract, and then construction could start as early as the fall this year. So that maybe gives you a sense of, from the park plan in 2015 to potential construction start date in the fall of this year. Some sense of the project timeline. With that, that's essentially the presentation that we thought would be helpful to start the discussion. And so Chris has reappeared, and I'm hoping he can help facilitate the question and answer, and we'd be happy to talk more about the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks, guys. So maybe you can stop sharing your screen until we need it again, and we'll hear some questions. There's quite a few in the queue already. So I know there's a couple of you there's one of you with your hands up, and there's quite a few questions in the queue. So I'm gonna get at them in the order in which they came in. And so our first question is from Susan Sitter. And that is about, has the decision been made to build the hall at Cooper's Green rather than at some other location?
Excellent question. And the answer is, the answer is no decision has been made. And that's part of why we're here tonight to talk about this. So Craig ran through the history of the project, and other sites were looked at and tested. And as part of the work that was done to prepare for tonight, we checked the project assumptions and made contact with the school district number 46 to check the conversation that we'd had with them previously, and found that the information that was gathered both through the management plan and through the work that was done by the task force appeared to remain valid. And so the proposal as it stands is to build a new hall on the footprint of the existing hall. And I guess through the survey or through comments that you might care to share tonight, we'll find out if there's new information that we should be aware of and consider as part of our next steps. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Landon Dix had a couple of questions. So the first question from Landon is about the washrooms on the floor plan. Shows one washroom with access from the exterior. Is this planned to be open to the public to be accessible 24/7?
Yes.
And his second
an easy one.
Great. And his second question is about a generator plan for the hall. Is one planned which can provide a community refuge during times of mass power outage or disaster?
No, and can I add some more to that?
Yeah, please, yeah.
I had in my notes, but I wasn't looking at my notes the whole time. I did want to mention that the task force during the design process, there were a number of kind of requests and wish list items that came up. And so we talked about it being, a place for the community to gather in a disaster, but very quickly kind of realized this is not a post-disaster kind of facility. That's not really what the project was scoped as. But there were other things that came up in terms of scope. Could there be more storage, or could there be a small meeting room maybe? Or could we have this piece of kitchen equipment? And so through the design process, the task force was very engaged with knowing the scope of what the replacement would be and being pretty committed to sticking with that scope. It'd be very easy to add a small meeting room or to add a little bit more storage. And so I just wanted to mention that scope creep was really top of mind for all the design team and for the task force through the process.
Okay, great, thank you. There's another question here from Andrea Smith, who had her hand up. And so Andrea, I'm going to call on you. I'm going to allow you to ask your question yourself. So you can talk and ask the question. Then we'll mute you after you've asked it.
Okay, I got the hand up, lowering hand wrong. But anyway, I do have a question to ask. Since this has been going on since 2015, and the Halfmoon Bay Community Association has raised $344,000 themselves for this location, I'm wondering what the motivation is for the SCRD now to be considering another location.
Thank you.
Excellent question, Andrea. Thank you. I'll say this is a significant project, and SCRD doesn't get the opportunity to invest in new facilities very often. So anytime we go into a big project like this, we want to make sure that we are making the best step forward that we can for the community, and knowing that we're working with public resources. And so this is a pre-launch check that the SCRD board asked us to make to understand if any of the planning assumptions or design priorities that come from that long process that you referenced have changed, and see if there's any opportunity to strengthen or improve the project as compared to what was there before. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Andreas has a question to ask here, which he's typed in, and that is, what time frame has the future sea level rise been incorporated into this design? So he says predictions say 1 meter by the end of the century and 3.5 meters over the next few centuries if we stick to the 1.5 centigrade suggested by the Paris Accord. Can you fill us in on that?
Yeah, I to be honest, I don't have a time frame for what has been incorporated in that design question. What I can offer is to say the issue came up during the design process. We have a geotechnical consultant on board who specifically looked at the flood construction level, and we asked for the geotech to define what that flood construction level is in order to build to that. And so that's the process that has happened. There could certainly be further study of climate risk issues that could be undertaken. And so I know that the question of flooding and sea level rise has come up before. And I think through this process of gathering comments, it's one that's still on the list to confirm.
Great, thank you. There's a question here from an anonymous attendee who's asking what consideration was given to additional multi-purpose uses such as badminton or pickleball, and what would that add to the cost?
There was conversation about pickleball and having a legitimate court size. Again, the scope, it would add cost. The amount of cost, I don't know exactly, but I think through the task force, asking the question and pushing back, the scope was to replace the hall. The current hall certainly won't host pickleball. It's got a 8-foot ceiling at best, but this is a replacement of that same facility. So it has a large gathering space. It's got more volume and some exposed structure, but the mandate wasn't to include a sports court or a pickleball court as part of the program.
Thank you. There's another couple of questions here from Andreas typed in. First one is, what measures of resource efficiency have been incorporated into the current design? So solar, rainwater, energy efficiency, LEED standards, that kind of thing.
Yeah, again, we have a very qualified mechanical consultant on board in terms of building systems and energy efficiency, and we are absolutely qualified to take that through to the end as well. However, there hasn't been a mandate from the SCRD or from the task force to target any particular sustainability targets. These will be code compliant. They'll be, and certainly with the changing code requirements for energy performance, it will perform far better than the current hall. But at the moment, there is not a performance target that we are identifying in terms of LEED or passive house or well or that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. And there's kind of a follow-up to that. What's the rough estimate of the ongoing maintenance costs either the HMBCA or the SCRD would have to shoulder on an ongoing basis for this $3 million building?
Thanks, Chris. We have to extrapolate because the building would be a different size from the current building. But if we just do a straight extrapolation based on floor area, estimated operating costs are $41,000 a year.
Great. Those are the annual operating costs, including maintenance and everything else. Great. Thank you. Andy Jones Cox, he's actually got his hand up, and Andy, maybe I'll get you to open your mic. You had a question about the annual operating costs and also the annual revenue potential. Andy, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yep.
A few years ago, my son and now daughter-in-law looked at Cooper's Green as a potential wedding site, and they didn't go ahead because it wasn't quite big enough and it didn't have a kitchen. But it kind of highlights to me, in all of this, the project so far, the analysis, the public engagement, it's all very analytical, I could say almost clinical. Nobody seems to mention the fact that Cooper's Green is an absolute gem of a place, spectacular views, beautiful location, accessible, all of those kind of things. And in actual fact, continuing from the previous question, okay, $41,000 a year in maintenance costs is probably a very small amount compared with the potential revenue. I would guess, with a little bit of research, that a wedding at that location could easily be like $4,000 or more dollars will be very conservative revenue estimate. So, you know, if we look at things that way, a gem of a place that can earn a heck of a lot more than the maintenance and operating costs, why are we not going ahead right away and stop looking at other locations? This is the place, let's get on with it.
Great. Thanks very much. Was there anything you wanted to respond to on that, Ian or Craig?
Just say thank you. Thank you for the comment. Thanks, Andy.
I guess I could offer too that we have some experience providing dining halls for summer camps, and surprisingly, as soon as they're built, they become wedding venues, and it wasn't really something that we predicted, but I only say it to basically support your comment that I think that's a very viable option to generate revenue.
Great. Lots of questions coming into the Q&A, so I'll keep reading them out for you guys. Reno asks, is the boat launch going to be available during construction?
Thanks for the question, Reno. As part of construction, a whole traffic management plan would need to be put together, but certainly that plan would take into account the other needs around the facility. And I can say that as a goal, SCRD would strive to limit impacts on the park and on the ramp, and to the extent that we can ensure that access to that ramp remains available. We understand how popular it is. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Another question from Landon. Discussions around other locations for the site have been heard in the community, as Susan Sitter's question suggests. So how is it possible to allow a different location than Cooper's Green if people have put their money by way of community donations to Cooper's Green as the location currently planned?
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks, Landon, for the question. The nature of the relationship between SCRD and the Halfmoon Bay Community Association is set out for this project is set out in an MOU, which does focus the effect of the fundraising on Cooper's Green Park. And so I can't speak to what might happen if another site outside of the park was selected. I would just say that the limits of the agreement and the intent of the donors who have given to the project is understood to be focused on the park. Thanks.
Great. And we might have answered this already, but just another shot at it too. Landon asks if there's any sustainable building initiatives plan, any lead goals, passive design. Did you touch on that already, Craig?
Yeah, I'll mention it. The building will obviously be modeled, and so it will be measured, and that information can be conveyed in order for people who know about energy performance, sort of on the spectrum of energy performance where it would land. But at the moment, no, there's not been a specific rating system target identified.
Great, thank you. Lynn Smith is asking if, another one about location. So if the change from Cooper's Green to elsewhere is granted, can those that generously contributed from HMB retract their donation? Personally, she says, we only knew of it to be HMB community fundraiser, not elsewhere, but it's just a question at this point. And I know many others have voiced this in the Halfmoon Bay neighborhood. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. That's getting back to the point I just made, that the regional district understands that the agreement with the community association and the proposition that the community association has been fundraising on is for a hall in the park. And so on the regional district side, no assumption is being made about the use of fundraised dollars if a site outside of Cooper's Green is selected. And obviously lots of work would be needed on addressing that question if indeed another location was chosen. Thanks.
Thank you. Susan Sitter has asked another question here. Is there any consideration for site work to improve the park itself?
There will be site work associated with the building project for sure, just in terms of services and repairs for the impact that those installation of services requires. I know that in the park management plan, there is a desire to expand parking in certain areas that were identified specifically in the plan. The extent to which they're included in the building project or whether they would be separated as other site park improvements, perhaps Ian could speak more to that.
Thanks, Craig. The project as scoped right now does include parking improvements, but that's one of those design aspects and project scope pieces that isn't 100% settled, as this project is not fully designed yet. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Maybe this is in the same ballpark here, but I'll ask it. Another one from Landon. He says, recent geotechnical reports by Kerwood Lidl initiated by the SCRD has indicated issues around bank erosion and culvert sediment accumulation, among other issues. So these issues are on Fisherman's Road on the way to the hall between the pond and the ocean. Will these be addressed with the construction of the hall, or is this going to be another issue for the SCRD to take care of separate from the hall?
Thanks for that question. So what I can say is that any construction project in Cooper's Green Park needs to be extremely sensitive to the environmental conditions in and around the park. There's both marine foreshore and a riparian area in the park. And so erosion and sedimentation management associated with this project need to be very carefully planned and monitored. And the involvement of a qualified environmental professional would be required. I'm not sure about the specific issues that are being referenced. Maybe that's something that Landon could tell us more about in the questionnaire. But I would note that Fisherman's Road is a Ministry of Transportation road. So who's doing what upgrades when would need to be looked at. But certainly the project would strive to not exacerbate any issues, and to the extent that it can contribute to environmental improvement, do that as well. Thanks.
Thanks. Question here from Shelley. So according to an August 2nd, 1982 Coast News article called Connor Park History Explained, written by Peggy Connor, says the only condition is a covenant on the land that it be used for recreational purposes. I'm not sure if that's an answer to a question, or you want to speak to that, Ian?
Well, that's an interesting bit of history. Thank you for sharing that, Shelley. Cooper's Green is also zoned as a park and noted as a community green space in the official community plan. And this use for a community hall aligns with that. Well, both the planning regulations right now, and it sounds like as well with the intent at the time that the land was donated to the regional district. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Question from an anonymous attendee, pretty straightforward. When will the decision be made about where the hall will be built?
Well, I can speak to the next process steps, which are, I guess, a partial answer. The next process steps, as Craig referenced, are after tonight and after a period where the questionnaire will be open. Principal's team will be preparing some analysis of what was heard, and that will go to the regional district board in a staff report in February. And then the project will be considered as part of the 2021 budget. And I'll also note that if anyone's really keen and has read the round one budget documents that are for meetings that are coming up next week, you will see a placeholder for this project included in those documents, but it is just a placeholder, knowing that discussion will occur in March at the round two meetings. And the board, the SCRD board, may decide to to proceed with the project on the basis of a given location at that time, or they may take another decision, and that's the board's prerogative. Thanks.
Thanks. Andreas asking another question. Sorry?
I was just going to say thanks for answering that, Ian. That was not something I could.
Great. Andreas asking another question here about the current location limiting accessibility of the boat ramp. So how is the future of the ramp being considered in the design and for the choice of location?
Thanks. So there was some analysis and some community dialogue hosted by Area B Director Laurie Pratt last summer, relating to that boat ramp. And at that time, it was observed that there's both synergy and competition between the ramp and the other uses in the park, not just limited to community hall. And the direction from the Regional District Board at that time, or I guess it was the fall by then, was to continue to seek management plan improvements that respect the fairly light load rating for that ramp, while working with our Regional Economic Development Organization to explore and potentially diversify our boat ramp complement on the coast.
Right.
And so by improving the management of the ramp and in terms of the times that it's used for different types of users and things like that, the goal would be to find complementarity of two community assets that are located adjacent to each other.
Okay, thank you. Continuing taking the questions in order here. So Donna asked a question, and that was, what will be the ongoing capital replacement costs?
Thank you for the question, Director McMahon. So basic accounting for capital replacement would be an annual contribution of $37,000, increasing by 2% annually. But it is worth saying that that's assuming 100% replacement cost planning, and that's a policy decision that hasn't been made at this point. That's a service level decision. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. Landon's got a question typed up here, and I know you've got your hand up, Landon. There's quite a few other questions ahead of you, so I'll read your typed question out, and then I'll go to you in a little bit for your hand up question. The question here is, has there been any discussion at this point in the design around finished materials? Roughly can be seen with the renderings, but for example, with siding and decking, be wood or of a composite material that'll withstand time and the elements. What do we know about finishing yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're making that decision on another project right now between composite and wood decking, leaning towards composite. I'll keep you posted. But a lot of those decisions are during the next stage of design development and preparation of construction documents. So it has not been decided yet.
Great, thank you. Gil asked a question, what considerations have been allowed for vehicle parking?
Yeah, I guess, sorry, either of us could probably answer, but I think the parking strategy has been inherited from the park management plan. And so there are a specific number of stalls that are shown notionally at this point. There still needs to be civil design in order to actually describe them for construction. But there's been, I think, 4 spots where additional parking is being planned around and in the park.
Yeah, and I apologize, I can't remember the exact net gain, but development on a few parts of the park was planned early on to test the idea of constructing a hall that had a larger occupancy.
Great. A question from Lisa Johnson-Stott, and she's asking, are property taxes part of the annual operating cost, or aren't they applicable here?
property taxes part of the annual operating cost?
I assume the question is that what's funding the annual operating cost, property taxes?
So right, okay. So if I understand the question right, Lisa, the majority of the community parks budget is paid for by property taxes, with user fees as a supplement. And so there are user fees charged for example, community hall use that help to defray the direct property tax costs.
Great, thanks very much. Let's keep going here. So we have another one from relating to the park's master plans from an anonymous attendee who asks, in the park's master plan, it was identified that the boat launch was to be addressed in any upgrade to the park. So has that been addressed in the proposal? So questions about the boat launch.
Thanks. Well, I would draw anonymous attendees' attention and anyone else who's interested to the community dialogue report and next steps that were set in 2020 that describe how the management of that ramp can be sustained and how it can be improved. Thanks.
Thank you. Anonymous attendee, maybe the same one, not sure, could be a different one, asking also about the current dimensions of the hall. So how much larger would it need to be to accommodate some of the sports suggested, the pickleball, badminton that was suggested earlier?
That's maybe a bit more detail than I can answer just in a conversation. It would be something that we could look at. I don't imagine it would need to grow a lot more for a pickleball court in particular. We've had lots of conversation about that. But I would defer that to a design study rather than try to answer it here as a question.
Thank you. Anonymous attendee, question about limits placed on the number of weddings or large events. This person's concerned with that the hall will be commercialized to the detriment of less profitable events, and also has the noise associated with larger events been considered too?
Excellent questions. In terms of the first part, limits on events, that hasn't come up. I would say that an operating plan for this hall just hasn't been developed yet, and potentially if there's a community partner involved with the community association, that may be something that they would look at, or that we'll hear more about through this project check-in. And it's the kind of thing where if an operating change needs to be put in to set a particular type of limit, then that's something I'm sure that our parks team and our elected officials would be interested in hearing about. In terms of noise, yes, there are anything that would occur in the park is subject to our noise bylaw, and as well with siting of the park or siting of the hall in the park, considerations about where openings on the building are relative to neighboring properties were considered as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Jackie Jones Cox, how are you guys doing? Okay, take a breath. There's a lot of questions.
Good questions.
We're playing, they're good questions. We're playing questions tennis here. Jackie Jones Cox has a question here, and she's asking, what would happen to the granted funds if the SCRD chose to pursue an alternative location?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chris. And yes, there are a lot of questions, but like this one, they're good questions.
Super important.
Yeah, greatly appreciate them. What would happen to the granted funds? Well, as I mentioned when I was talking about the grant, the application referenced all of the design development documents that you saw images of in Craig's slides. And so while it's understood that the project will be refined as final design is done, if we're going to change the location, there would have to be a process of working with the grantor to seek approval. And I would add that there's quite a number of supporting studies, geotechnical, archaeological, environmental, that were done on the basis of the current site and were required for the grant. So potentially there would be additional study required to, potentially to prove the feasibility of another site, but certainly as well to support a change to the grant approval if that was required. And I would specifically add that SCRD understands that the funds must be used in Area B, Halfmoon Bay. Thanks.
Thank you. Brett's got a question. I get to read this one. Why has this project taken so long to break ground? There's widespread community support and fundraising, an amazing location for community benefit for years to come, brilliant architecture master plan conceived by a skilled and experienced architecture firm. Can we expect the SCRD to continue to bring red tape and delays to future projects such as this? This place, when built, rented out as a wedding venue, will pay for itself from the day it is built.
Well, thank you, Brett. I think I can gather from that you're quite supportive and excited about the project. Why has it taken so long? Well, a big part of it was a unique, in my experience as a public servant, delay, through a combination of totally reasonable events in the announcement of grant funding. And that grant funding moved, that was 18 months of waiting, and that announcement moved this project from an idea with very little financial support. And if you think back to that pie chart, the grant is 2/3 of the budget right now, to something that is almost 80% funded. So that's a big move forward. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Landon, you've been patient waiting with your hand up, so I'm going to allow you to. You took your hand down. Okay. You did have a question earlier, which was, does the scope include improvements to the boat launch, such as resurfacing or widening?
No, it doesn't. But I will, for those that are interested, share that separately, there is a separate community parks project that will be doing surfacing improvements to that ramp. Thanks.
Okay, great. Landon, did you want to ask your question? I see you put your hand back up again. You can go ahead and ask your question if you like.
Hi there. Yeah. Sorry, I lost internet connection there. Back to a question I asked earlier. And first of all, thanks for answering all my questions and putting on this forum tonight. I know you guys are being grilled, but you're doing a great job. I wanted to comment on when I was talking about the geotechnical bank erosion sediment buildup in the culvert. Is any of Fisherman's Road being reconstructed as part of this whole project, or are you working with the existing roadway?
Thanks, Landon.
I think that's good question, Landon. I think that's where that additional civil work that Craig mentioned comes in. It's a Ministry of Transportation road, so I don't think significant reconstruction is planned, but with parking adjacent that would be built in the park and by the regional district, the interface between those and what opportunities come out of that is something that would need to be looked at as part of next steps.
Yeah, I would just add that the parking related to the hall replacement is certainly in scope. And so that implies work in and around the road, and implies that there needs to be some discussion with MOTI and that, so that there's some engagement with the road, but it's not for the road itself. It's for the sake of parking for the hall.
Great, thank you. Susie Weeks was asking about this other site that's being alluded to. Is the SCRD reached out to solicit other sites? That's her question.
Thanks for the question, Susie. So as Craig mentioned, well, no, we haven't reached out to solicit other sites since 2018, maybe. I can't remember. It might have even started in 2017. And I suppose it was considered as well in the park management plan. So Craig showed a slide that showed a whole bunch of different colored blocks in the park, even one across the other side of Red Roofs. And as well, at that time, sites in the Welcome Woods area were considered. And kind of an open-ended question was asked of, is there some other place in Halfmoon Bay where that nobody's thinking about that would be a great site? And through a few iterations of checks on that, and taking into account technical pros and cons, the site of the current hall was what was selected or proposed. Thanks.
That was our 30th typed question, by the way, and we've got more to come as well. We've got about 24 minutes left here.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning that the issue of a totally different site has come up recently. And so because of that, we've had recent conversations to explore that synergy. I think Ian mentioned it earlier in the presentation, that conversations with school district around synergies or site opportunities, whether there's something to really explore there. And so far, those haven't amounted to anything that would compete with the current proposal.
Thank you. Question from Lisa Johnson Stotts, has a security system been budgeted? And if certain facilities are open 24/7 for use, then there should perhaps be exterior cameras surrounding that. What have you guys got?
There is an allowance for a security system in the project. We don't have a number of cameras or anything like that, but there's an intruder alarm.
Great, thank you. There's a few anonymous ones here. I'll just read them in. There's sort of three of them that go together. So the first one is, I think the idea of a new hall at Cooper's Green is a great idea. I have issues with the budget cost of $3 million. For example, the field or the lawn needs to be rebuilt. And there was a suggestion that Cooper's Green might be decommissioned as a park if the new hall is not built there. Is that a possibility?
I'm not aware of that suggestion, and speaking as a staff member, I would have a hard time imagining that or recommending that. I would just say that if something, there's quite the process of changing something from a park to something else, and it's it's not an easy process. Thanks.
Thank you. Shelley is typed another question kind of in reference to the one she typed earlier about the old article about Connor Park. And she says, my quote from the paper was in order to point out that Connor Park would not be an appropriate place for the hall because of the covenant. And I wondered if the SCRD was aware of the covenant.
Okay, yes.
You are aware of the covenant? Yes.
Yeah, I believe it applies to Welcome Woods, the area adjacent to Connor Park, but I am aware of restrictions on all of those lands. Yeah, thank you.
Andreas Ties asked the question, has COVID changed aspects of the current design that will need to be incorporated into future plans?
Yeah, that is a good question that we are struggling with for a number of our projects. As you can imagine, we haven't really touched the Cooper's Green project during this time and haven't really been sort of released to take a look at what the implications might be. So I really don't have a straight answer for you, but there would likely be a desire to make a few adjustments in order to make the orders that we're under these days be able to be facilitated in a gathering space. But fundamentally, we're talking about a community gathering space, so it's a small building. So nothing has changed in the design yet, but it's on our radar as designers of community buildings in general.
Great, thank you. Lisa Johnson Stott has her hand up, and so I'm actually going to ask you to, if you'd like to ask your question. You can unmute yourself, Lisa, and go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
First of all, hello, fellow Halfmoon Bay residents. So yes, I wanted to just clarify my question with regard to property taxes, although that was an answer, I was interested in anyway. I wasn't sure, are property taxes payable on government buildings? Because with $41,000 of operating costs, I guess my question is, what does that cover? Is there an element of property taxes associated with a hall such as this? And if so, what would those anticipate to be on an annual basis?
That is an excellent question. And I don't know the answer to the tax status of a building like this. I apologize, I should. The $41,000 a year includes utility, maintenance, and janitorial costs. It may also include insurance for the building as well.
Great, thank you. More questions here in chat as we're going along. Lynn Bogartis is asking a question about, has any provision been made for space for small meetings or gatherings?
No, I'm not sure if you caught my comments earlier, but the question had come up during design a number of occasions, and in order to keep the scope of the hall contained to what the original scope was, we haven't added small meeting room space. There's ideas about how the larger gathering space could be made smaller or subdivided or made sort of more cozy in the corner, that kind of thing. But at the moment, no small meeting room space have been added to the design.
Great, thank you. Tim asks, rough math, we're at $900 per square foot of undercover space. What is special about the building that justifies that cost?
Yeah, I'd have to check what that unit rate math is. This is, from a construction point of view, a pretty conventional building. So the main hall space does have some exposed structure, which is really where we wanted to focus the nice part of the building, where people are gathering and having a strong connection to the park and to the ocean. The other parts of the building are very straightforward: wood frame, gang nail trusses, slab on grade. Perhaps we can go through the budget in more detail and answer your questions, but I don't have a straight answer for you for where there's not any particular premium put into this project.
Okay, thanks so much. We have another question here from Mayor Seegers from Seashelt. Given the electoral area residents throughout the coast will be levied a tax increase to pay back the loan to build the hall, how do we know if they will agree with the tax increase? So how is their input into this process being sought?
Thank you for the question, Director Seegers. That's part of the conversation tonight, and we look forward to receiving feedback on that question in terms of the level of support for the project through the questionnaire, and staff are actively listening to the tone of the questions that are being asked as well, and then through both the placement of the report from this exercise on a public agenda, response to that, and then consideration through the budget process. There's an opportunity for participants in the service to share their perspective on whether the borrowing is something they're in favor of. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to get Andrea Smith. You can unmute your mic, Andrea. You have a question you wanted to ask.
Yes, I was absent for about 20 minutes, so I apologize if this question's already been asked. But since the money raised, the $344,000 raised by the Halfmoon Bay Community Association through donations, or specifically for this location, if another location is decided upon, won't this money have to be legally returned to the donors? And this sounds like a pretty complicated process if it does.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Andrea. The regional district respects and understands the limits of the agreement for fundraising for the hall that we have with the community association, and I agree with you. I think changing the location and then having to work through the process of engaging all of the donors would be a complicated exercise, especially knowing how many donors there are. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack asked a question about parking. So the question is the capacity of the building appropriate for the amount of parking on site, or will a variance be required? It seems an event for 120 would easily overwhelm parking and spill onto Red Roofs Road.
Yeah, there is intention to expand the parking on Red Roofs Road, on the gravel lot at the upper level, and a few spots down near the water. Parking may still be an issue if everybody drives to a 120-person event, but essentially we are targeting to meet what the bylaw requirement is for parking.
Yeah, I would add that relief from the zoning parking requirement was sought and approved back in, I think it was 2017, very early in the project, as a way of testing the feasibility of building a larger building. And we note that there are a number of events in the park that do attract large numbers of people, and the organizers of those events, including the community association, have been very successful in working to manage the parking and promote alternative transportation solutions so that parking doesn't become a community concern. Thanks.
Thank you. Just a comment here, maybe you can, if you want to comment on it, from an anonymous attendee who said the suggestion about decommissioning the park came from the Coast Reporter in an interview with Laurie Pratt a couple of weeks ago, as I recall, so it was shocking to me. I'm not sure who provided that. The comment that was offered in the questions. Donna McMahon has asked, has the building been designed to be easily added onto or modified to meet future needs?
From a design point of view, there's been no kind of criteria to expand the community hall. It's been conceived of primarily as a replacement and an upgrade in order to serve the same community and the park.
Thank you. Gil asked a question about green space. How much existing green space will be affected, and specifically wants to know about trees?
Yeah, the design of the building, as you'll see from the graphics, is really driven by some of the most sort of healthy and mature stand of trees in the park. There's, I think, two trees close to the existing hall that would need to be removed in order to build the new hall. But other than that, the nice part about using that same site within the park is that it's already developed, and so it minimizes the amount of disturbance to the rest of the site. I would say that there will likely be disturbance for the sake of the sewer system replacement and the site services that would need to be connected to the building. A lot of that would need to be upgraded. So the intention would be to return it to its park state once it's had time to recover.
Great, thank you. Lynn had some comments about taxes, but I'm not quite understand them. I'll read them out and then we'll just see. She says, just going to say taxes are subsidized, not washed out on government funded projects in BC on approved credit regarding the project at large, i.e. native land zero tax percentage of raised funds. I have to admit, I don't get that, but if you've got anything to add to or clarify, that would be good.
I don't quite follow that either, Chris. So Lynn, if you're able to send us a note when through the questionnaire would be an easy way to do it, to explain what you're sharing. That would be appreciated. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And Laurie, thank you. The decommissioning of the park was not a quote by you, and thank you for making that clear in our questions. And I apologize for repeating a rumor. wasn't made by you. On the comment in the budget, this is from an anonymous attendee. The home and property that was just completed beside the present hall was originally owned by Jim and Kona Cooper. I'm pretty sure that the new home is larger than the new hall proposed. The new home has an outbuilding with solar panels. I think this goes to Tim's question about where all involved have come up with the price of $900 per square foot. The bottom line is the feeling is there's no need for SCRD borrowing money.
Well, thanks for the comment. I will say that, as I mentioned on the slide about cost changes, that there's active fundraising underway and the possibility of in-kind donations, particularly, that could reduce the need to borrow any money. And would just add that we, through the process, industry best practice for cost estimating involving qualified professionals has been applied. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Sandra Cunliffe asking a question. Since it looks like there's an opportunity for significant in-kind labor and material donations, how will this be accounted for in the unfunded gap in time for the upcoming budget review?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. I think that for the purpose of preparing budget documentation, staff will have to rely on what is confirmed, and we will do our best to round up what we understand to be in process so that we can speak to that. But obviously, until things are confirmed, it's not possible to budget on the basis of a hopeful, even if it's extremely hopeful. But we look to capture anything that's in process so that we can provide as complete a picture as we can to the SCRD board.
Great, thank you. A question from Dave Spicer, a question and a comment, more comment, I think. Is a follow-up on the parking. In the 2018 schematic design, version 2 of the park, it shows 10 new parking spaces near the volleyball court at the top of the boat launch, and about 22 small new spaces in the upper gravel parking lot. And he says, as an active user of the park and a boater, I'd be concerned about the ability to launch or pull a boat out with parking at the top of the launch area. And also, where would a boater park if the top lot's just 22 small car spots? So please consider boat and trailer users in the planning. Thank you.
Thanks. Helpful input for potential future civil work.
Great, and also good to put in the survey as well. Another place for those kinds of comments to come in. A couple more questions, and then we're going to be wrapping up. Lynn has just pointed out that her tax answer was in responding to Lisa's question earlier.
Oh,
didn't have an answer to. So, thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. And I was trying to get an answer as well, and I believe that the community buildings such as this are statutorily tax exempt. Thanks.
And this will be our final question this evening before we wrap up. It's from Tim, who asks about why we're still designing and building community facilities and amenities around the car, especially when serviced by public transit.
Well, Tim, you're speaking to the you're speaking to the city planner and me, but multimodal access is something that is an exciting opportunity with anytime you're planning a new facility, and fortunately Cooper's Green Park is transit served and has reasonable active transportation access as well. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. So close to 60 questions. We've had 69 participants on in the webinar today. So thank you very much, everybody who's asked your questions, everybody who's put your hand up and taken the time to think about this. And I'll turn it over to Craig just to see what comes next here.
Yeah, I guess I, like all of us, would just really like to thank people for tuning in and for engaging so fully with some of the hard questions for this project. There is certainly some work still to be done. We're hoping that once it goes to the budget committee, we're back on track and working towards our next milestone. What we would like to just maybe highlight at the end of this session is that there is a survey. I don't know if I should maybe just share my screen on the last slide. Just so that you have it in front of you. I get rid of all of these.
I'll also put the link in the chat as well.
That'd be great. I think what we're really trying to do is, I know the timeline is short, but we're trying to gather real valuable local community comments and questions now before this goes to the budget committee, so that staff are prepared to write a report that can legitimately say, here's what the community said when we reached out to ask. So yeah, there's a survey online. You can fill it out once. It probably won't let you do it again. You can, we'll send a link or post a link, I guess, on the SCRD website that will have a recording. So if you've got friends who you think might want to see this event, or you want to rewind and go back through the images, that should be up on Monday, the 1st. And I think that, from our point of view, is the wrap up for the presentation.
Great.
Ian, would you like to add anything else?
Just to reiterate, thank you to everyone for attending, and thank you especially for the excellent questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody. A couple of compliments from Donna and Landon in the questions as well. Thank you for your time and your answers. Thank you all for your attention, and we'll bid farewell and have a great weekend coming up.